Thanks very much. This paper is part of my PhD thesis, which is an attempt to understand how and why economics and statistics shaped policy design and implementation in late colonial and early post-colonial Ghana. However, since I do believe that it's not the most common thing at the History of Economic Thought Conference to have a paper exclusively devoted to sub-Saharan Africa, perhaps it's better to start introducing this. Right? This is part of the results of the latest History of Economic Society survey. Question 21. Journal of History of Economic Thought should have more articles addressing the history of economics from parts of the world other than Europe and the United States. As you can see, 70 members agreed, only 27 disagreed. Well, I mean, I shouldn't be saying this because it kind of goes against my argument, but 71 were completely different. Still, on a more serious note, what I'm trying to do is better understood by looking at the current state of historiography. So on one hand, we've got this body of literature written by historians of science who work in African context and have basically explored the relationship between science and state building with reference to engineering, anthropology, and medicine, but they completely left out economics and statistics. On the other hand, we've got a massive body of literature which has analyzed the relationship between economics, thought, and economic policy in a variety of geographical and institutional contexts, spanning from classical Britain, the United States, the Soviet Union, and more recently Latin America, where we've had and we'll have some remarkable example of this at the Summer Institute. However, these people, on the other hand, have left Africa out. The final point is related to the historiography of development economics, which is still at its very, very initial phase. Let's say that a big part of what we've got so far is basically made up of participant histories, or excellent biographical works, or the history of international organizations like the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, or the United Nations. Now, if we keep in mind the policy-oriented nature of the first generation of development economics, I do believe that it would make sense to explore the relationship between economic theory and economic policy at the ground level. That's why I chose to focus on a single state, to see what was happening on the ground in a way. And as you will see, most of my quotes and primary sources are from the Ghanaian National Archives. Go to surprise. Now, Helen Tilly, in a recent survey of colonial science in Africa, defined Africa as a living laboratory, in the sense that for colonial administrators, really tested in a way the applicability of techniques, ideas and practices originated in the colonial metropoles and then transplanted to Africa. But when it comes to economic knowledge and to economics as a branch of knowledge, I do believe that Gold Coast and Ghana is the name which Gold Coast took after achieving independence in 1957, played a very special role for a variety of reasons. Now, one might think that it's kind of relevant if you look at the political map of Africa. Then it's a very, very tiny state, so it's not particularly relevant in terms of population or. But on the other hand, first of all, it's a very interesting economic history. Cocoa crops were exported to Ghana, were transplanted in Ghana in the 1870s, and by the mid-20s, Ghana was the biggest exporter of cocoa in the whole world. And the British administration considered it a model colony. On the other hand, Ghana achieved independence on the 6th March 1957, so before most other African countries, and really came to embody the high hopes of African independence. And it also represented, under the leadership of Kwame Nkrumah, the man on the left, the first attempt to build a socialist planned economy in sub-Saharan Africa. On the other hand, Ghana was a formidable case study for the first generation of development economists who were extremely attracted to it and tried to influence Ghanaian policymaking in a variety of ways. The most remarkable example is William Arthur Lewis, the first winner of the Nobel Prize in development economics in 1979. Who was Nkrumah's personal economic advisor for 2 years, or Nicholas Calder, who went there in the early 60s and designed a disastrous fiscal policy which led to riots, arrests, and all that. Right. My main argument is that economists and statisticians played an increasingly important role in the task of state building faced by policymakers in late colonial and early post-colonial Ghana. This certainly has something to do with the evolution of economics as a discipline, with the internal history of discipline. The most single important factor being the rise of national income accounts and macroeconomics. But more importantly, it has something to do with the politicians' perception of what was so distinctive about economists and statisticians. So their own construction, their own version of the expertise of economists and statisticians vis-a-vis other natural and social sciences. However, I should perhaps point out that the kind of state these people were trying to build varied to a huge extent in this relatively short time span period, in the sense that in 1928 we're still dealing with a fairly weak colonial state based on indirect rule, while from 1961 on we're dealing with a totalitarian regime of Marxist inspiration. So this is a very important addendum. My narrative is divided into three phases. The first, from 1928 till the Second World War, 1943 more precisely, where there was a very limited use of economic experts and statisticians, because the main social science, which was supposed to contribute to the making of colonial policy, was anthropology. So economists were still kind of a group of contested experts. The second phase, from the Second World War till 1960, saw the application of macroeconomic accounting, and therefore the first contribution that economists and statisticians gave to state building was at the level of representation, of putting together scattered data in order to represent an analytical template and a representation of the economy upon which policy decisions could be made. However, as I will argue later, this went far beyond the purely visual aspect of representing the economy and that important, if so far neglected, consequences for the building of state capacity. And thirdly, the third phase, from 61 to 66, when Nkrumah's regime was overthrown by a military coup d'etat, when economists and statisticians supported the idea of PanAfricanism, so even more ambitious, from state building to continent building, this visionary project of unifying the whole of Africa, and in the form of Marxist-Leninist ideological education. So what was the role of economists? The first generation of experts trying to collect agricultural statistics in the 20s became, in a way, a powerful tool of ideological propaganda designed to brainwash people, in a way. So, as I just said, the narrative begins in 1928 with the reorganization of the Department of Agriculture in the Gold Coast, which also marked the first employment of professional economists in this colony, and the addition of the two new sections devoted to rural economics and agricultural statistics, respectively. However, as one agricultural officer at the time pointed out, the interaction between statisticians, economists, and other experts was kind of difficult. He writes, horticulture, chemistry, and statistics of agriculture differ more from one another in methods and aims than, say, the customs does from the treasury. This fact makes it impossible to handle a department of agriculture in the same manner as one handles a uniform department. You have to keep in mind the stage at which we are in the professionalization of agricultural economics, in the sense that theoretical economists in economics department tended to look up onto agricultural economists, considering them mere field workers. And on the other hand, agricultural officers thought that the work of agricultural economists was not scientific enough. So in the 20s, the role of agricultural economists was still very much contested. The role of science in the making of colonial policy is very well explained by this figure, which is taken from Worthington Science in Africa, 1938. It's a collection of essays precisely dealing with the role the different branches of knowledge should play in the making of colonial policy. As you can see, there are four distinct realms: man, animals, plants, and inorganic. And you see all this, from botany, forestry, all these sciences interacting with each other. Interestingly enough, the only social science present here is anthropology. On top of that, there's no place for the science of scarcity in the making of colonial policy at this point in time. Well, one could argue that there are no arrows pointing from anthropology to other sciences. So one might wonder what the interaction really was with, for example, soil science. But on the other hand, one has to face statements of colonial scientists. For example, the biologist Julian Huxley, the brother of the author of Brave New World, who said that to be a good biologist in Africa, you have first of all to be a sympathetic anthropologist. Right. Why have I called this session Disconnected Voices? Because most of my talk is really about the politicians' appropriation of the economic expertise and the use in policy making and state building. In this case, the voices are disconnected because the economists are operating kind of in isolation in the Department of Agriculture, without really overlapping with the claims of the early nationalistic movements. On the other hand, there was kind of a synergetic interaction between the first generation of West African intellectuals and the social anthropologists. This is J.P. Dankwa, the foremost Ghanaian intellectual of the 20s and the leader of the first real nationalistic party, who pretty much approved the work of the Gold Coast District Commissioner for Anthropology, which was concerned with a huge variety of topics, from religion, culture, to land tenure, debt, and all that. So anthropologists dealt with economic issues at this point in time. And what made them interact in a way was the fact that they both rejected a straightforward approach based on quantification. They didn't really think that quantification could tell much about the specificity of African condition. They were adopting a holistic methodology in a way, both the economic writings of the first generation of African intellectuals and the first generation of anthropologists, in which the economic aspects were very much overwhelmed, they were constantly interacting with cultural and social aspects. I found a paper, actually, I was very surprised, by Crawford Goldwyn in 1967 on economic development and cultural change, in which he kind of problematized the rise of this form of proto-West African nationalism and institutionalism in the writings of these intellectuals in West Africa.
Your earlier quotation is from the general Washington. He's a general.
General.
Yeah, you have a quotation. There was a general Washington earlier.
It was a survey. It was a survey. It was an agricultural.
No.
Okay. Now things really changed in a way with the Second World War, with the rise of economic planning, when Africa rose to foremost importance for its strategic mineral resources and all this, and the institutionalization of economic expertise. In 1933, the creation in London of the Colonial Economic Advisory Council, which comprised people as different as a young William Arthur Lewis, then a Fabian socialist, and Lionel Robbins, who, however, didn't attend the sessions very often, as far as I could see from the meetings of the committees. This quote here from one of the memoranda of the council really gives an idea of how much has changed already in less than 10 years. It says, partly, the colonial government in the past has consciously planned the development of its territory. Law and administration have been favorite sons. Health and education the not so favorite daughters. There has been no economic stuff to look ahead and to direct. Prosperity and depression have been gifts from God or Satan, unforeseen if not as often incomprehended. This approach to colonial administration belongs to an era that is past. Of course, economists are the best people to put in administration to foster planning and to expand the role of the provision of welfare services, which was at the very core of the demands of nationalistic movements at this point in time. Let's talk a bit about what was the real contribution of this intellectual change to state capacity. First of all, I must say that the University College of Gold Coast was the first in the African British Empire to have a Department of Economics, and the first in which they started teaching economics to Africans. Which also saw the Constitution, 1949 for economics, of an economic research cell, the Department of Agriculture and other government departments, how to collect statistics in order to produce national income accounts. So in one generation, the same economists who were struggling within the Department of Agriculture to see their expertise acknowledged had come back, and now we're the ones in charge for telling the Department of Agriculture how to make their statistics relevant. There's some irony in this. And this also played a very interesting, if neglected, role in the history of decolonization. I mean, true decolonization really implies the transfer of the affairs of the state to the local people, rather to the colonial administrators. The training of African economists proved very, very important in shaping the discourse of decolonization. This is a letter which I found in the Ghanaian archives of Peter Addy, who was one of the colonial economists in charge for the preparation of national income accounts and reports on labor conditions and all that, to the colonial secretariat, which he says, the house-to-house visits which are involved in an investigation of this sort, and the questions which is necessary to ask, make the task of an investigator not at all agreeable. Early work of this kind always meets with misunderstanding and abuse. They really had problems in asking people how much do you earn and in creating reliable statistics. So the use of local economists proved to be a very important element in for the colonial office. Williams, who was one of the few lecturers in economics at the University College of the Gold Coast, wrote to Arnold Plant in 1949 that the African students had very considerable advantage in knowing the local conditions and of being able to make more detailed inquiries from African population. There are 2 points that I want to make with regard to these 2 points. The first is the tension between international standards and indigenous knowledge, in the sense that these people had to be trained at the University College of Gold Coast, where at this point in time, the economics they were taught was exactly the same as in Britain. There was no problem of trying to make it relevant to the local context. But on the other hand, there was the acknowledgement of the fact that these people had a comparative advantage in extracting relevant bits of information to be filled in an analytical template which works because it's recognized abroad, because it's legitimized in a wide policy arena from the United Nations or the international community. That is the case of national income accounts. And that leads me to the second point, which I've just started working on, of statistics as a part of the social contract. We tend to think of statistics as facts, but when one reads these sources, can't help thinking that they are the product of an interaction between different people. And this is especially the case in African history, where if you read the history of population counting, for example, it was terrible. You find lots of letters in the archives of colonial administrators going to the field and finding empty villages because people, for fear of being taxed, just ran away and went to hide in the bush for fear of being counted. So as you see, the capacity of the state to relevant bits of information really tell us something about the legitimacy of the state itself. And this is the first application of the techniques of national income accounting in Ghana. The report on the financial and physical problems of development in the Gold Coast by Dudley Sears and C.Y. Ross, both from the Oxford Institute of Statistics and Applied Economics. They experimented a lot. They tried the national income accounts table, input-output, relative table, and accounts like this. Quote here really gives you a sense of the urgency with which these tools were approached. Sears wrote, the national accounts are 20 columnists for the first set of national accounts is called a sketch map. Further surveying maps are made. What's happened after a bit? 1957, Ghana gets independence. And Kwame Nkrumah, the president, was really supportive of this idea of Pan-Africanism. He was really trying to foster the political and economic union of the whole continent. However, Pan-Africanism meant different things to different people. In African history, there was the Casablanca group, the Monrovia group, and the former French colonies, and all of them actually had a different version of Pan-Africanism. What has been neglected so far in this historical field of broad political ideologies has been the technical side of it, the role of economic theory and statistics in fostering or opposing this kind of discourse. Now, in the case of Ghana, there are two conditions. One, in the economics of Pan-Africanism as a radical political discourse, which required not only a revolution in the way the economic interaction took place among African states, but a revolution in economic theory. The other version was the mild one, the politically acceptable one, the one of the vision for Africa, who said, wait a second, before you unify the continent, you have to adopt the same statistics, otherwise no continental planning will be possible. Now, Tanjika Mkandavira, who's an economist from Malawi who has worked a lot with the United Nations, wrote at some point that in spite of the joyful celebrations at independence, African universities were often born in chains, in the sense that the developmental agenda of state builders, of rulers, influenced to a great extent the content and the methods of teaching. That's the same everywhere, but particularly the case in countries which really feel a strong need to change radically their economic structure, their society, and all this. So Nkrumah established an unit of researchers called the Economics of African Unity, precisely to support this political argument, that Pan-Africanism was not only possible, but to be achieved soon, immediately. The activity of the group culminated in publication of only one book, Unity of Poverty, the Economics of Pan-Africanism, 1968, written by Reginald H. Green and Ann Segman. Reginald H. Green was an American economist who completed his PhD in Harvard in 1960, and then he flew to Ghana to take part in this exciting experiment of planning and renewal. And they wrote at the beginning of the book, can African economic unity be achieved? The answer is not only that it can be achieved, but that it must be achieved. African economic unity is a revolutionary concept. It requires an economic revolution. Now, as I said, this economic revolution is twofold. It deals with African intertrade and with economic theory. I was lucky enough to find one day in the department, the library of the Department of Economics at the University of Ghana, the only paper, discussion and published paper of the Department of Economics surviving from Nkrumah's period. And it was a paper buried in the screen, in which he basically tried to point out that they had to come out with a completely new theory of market integration. That the Pigouvian and Weimarian origins of market integration theory didn't apply to Africa. I was going against what was a political mission. He identified these three main flows: user comparative static and non-dynamic structural analysis, the assumption of negative rather than positive role for government policy, and the assumption based on the special case of industrial economies. Well, the last point is kind of clear, but the other two are very much only drafted in the paper. So I wasn't really able to figure out what it really meant. But however, it's an important document in the sense that it really gives you an impression of the fact that these guys were trying to find a new research program, a renewal in economic theory, which however failed to materialize. The other version of Pan-Africanism is the one associated to the United Nations, which contributed to shape significantly the landscape, the institutional landscape in which Africans were trained to become planners and rulers and policymakers. For example, the opening of the Center of Economic in Dakar, in Senegal, and the opening of a series of statistical training. So as you can see, the radical political discourse of the economists working in Ghana was neutralized in a way. Pan-Africanism became really all about teaching students from different African nations the same statistical techniques. There was no real reconceptualization involved. And Ghana was chosen as the main laboratory for West Africa. So we were trying to train people from Ghana, Nigeria, Liberia, and Sierra Leone in the same kind of statistical techniques, with a particular emphasis on sampling. What happened next? Well, in the 4 years between 1957 and 1961, Nkrumah really changed his mind about the kind of government he had to pursue. And he became more and more fascinated by socialistic programs in the Soviet Union and China. And he thought that the adoption of a socialist model could have been the only possible way of allowing Ghana to overcome its condition of underdevelopment. However, the interesting part is that he really thought that social sciences had to play an important role outside academia. And the contribution that they could make to nation building, to state building, was to convince people of the historical necessity of the party, of the historical necessity of socialism, and of their role in making the political economy of the country. Now, these are a few quotes from Nkrumah's public speeches about the role of science in society. Socialism without science is empty. Unless science is used for the betterment of mankind, I may not understand the reason for it at all. And finally, more interestingly, we have the resources to create a better life for our people, which is questionable in the same years in which foreign exchange were running, and it was inflation, and the state farms, which costed so much money, were all failing. What we need is widespread conviction in the correctness of our ideology. So I decided to open another educational institution, which was called the Kwame Nkrumah Institute of Economics and Political Science, or the Kwame Nkrumah Ideological Institute. The program of the institute is here. This is from a debate which preceded its opening. It said, to defend the party at all times, explain its policies to unenlightened, defend the government, and serve in a way as a liaison officer between the party and non-party members, between the government and the people, the nation and the municipal. The individual party member merges into the general body of the party and loses his individual identity, taking on the identity of the party, forms part of the whole system, to which therefore he must submit his entire personality. Sounds pretty scary in a way, but the interesting part is that political economy played an important role. This is the syllabus of the first year. One of the few documents which has survived, because apparently lots of documents related to these institutes were destroyed after the coup d'etat in 1966. However, I want to make you notice one thing. the number of hours devoted to applied economics and political economy per week was higher than the number of hours devoted to Nkrumahism, which was the official doctrine of the party. It was socialism based on our own African conditions. Tibor Samueli was a lecturer at the Institute for a few years, he was an Hungarian historian. He defined the Institute as a kind of cross between Socratic Athens, the London School of Economics, and the Moscow Institute of Marxism-Leninism. While not quite up to those standards, was a very well indeed. It's a very nice quote. The other interesting point is that the number of students that the Institute had was much higher than the number of students in economics and statistics courses at university, because the target audience for this institute was very, very broad. As Nkrumah said in one speech, this institute is for every one of us, from the highest party functionary to the lowest propagandist in the field. So farmers, primary school teachers were forced to go there, and eventually some students of the institute became famous. One example is Robert Mugabe, the dictator of Zimbabwe, announced in power. He studied here. He learned lots of things. Okay, this gives you a sense of the kind of economics they were studying. This is part of the syllabus of the course of political economy. The two main textbooks were a series of collection of texts from Marx's Capital and Lenin's Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, commented in the most difficult passages for the farmers, so we try to around so economics of capitalism, socialism, the objective character of economic laws, the essence of capitalist exploitation, imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, theory of economic development, and finally a couple of lectures devoted to the specificity of African conditions. So a lecture on the economy of Ghana, and another on the economy of other African countries, which is in a way consistent with what Nkrumah defined as Nkrumahism, socialism based on our own African condition. So he was trying to give everyone the tools of Marxism-Leninism in order to understand their role in society, how to be loyal members of the party, and how to serve the cause of national unity. Now, all this dream of social engineering crumbled away in February 1966 with the coup d'etat. But there's one last bit of evidence that I want to show you about the Kwame Nkrumah Ideological Institute. And that is a letter of March 1966 that the workers of the Institute wrote to the government, to the new government, to the National Liberation Council, which really makes you understand the extent to which the Ghanaian population had come to associate with this institute the worst aspect of totalitarianism. So the letter goes like this. We, the entire workers of the former Ideological Institute, numbering 474. Now the interesting thing is that these guys were not economists, they were not the teachers. They were the gardeners, the cooks, the plumbers employed at the institute. So let's say, we, the entire workers of the former Ideological Institute, numbering 474, do hereby pledge your unwavering loyalty and support to the National Liberation Council, and wish to present the following grievances. 1. That we wanted to make known that we worked at the former institute as loyal citizens of the Republic of Ghana, and basically to earn our living as honest workers. 2. That our connection with the former institute was non-political. 3. We pray that the council comes immediately to the aid of these workers who have been rendered jobless with the closing down of the former institute. The February pay, which is when the coup d'etat took place, would also be welcome. 4th point, and it's the most important, that the public be asked to refrain from molesting us for the simple reason that we were workers of the defunct institute. So this really gives you a sense of the atmosphere prevailing at the time. And finally, they end up all this triumphalism. We once more convey our most hearty congratulations to the chairman and members of the National Liberation Council for this timely action, and pledge our fullest cooperation in joining the national crusade in rebuilding our dear country free from nepotism, dictatorship, and political swindling. Long life National Liberation Council, long life Ghana. Beautiful. Anyway, the very last point that I want to make is the one where I think that the use of economics as a tool of brainwashing might be kind of this crazy idea typical of Marxist or totalitarian regimes. That was not the case, in the sense that even within the Western development economics profession, in some form, in a more subtle form, this idea was still prevailing, this huge contrast between tradition, between authentic Africanness and modernity. Look at this picture. This is the cover of the Nyasaland Economic Symposium, a huge development conference, development economics, which took place in 1962 in what is today Malawi. There are two Africans, as you can see. One is playing percussions on the left side. The other is dressed up in Western clothes, dressed up like Paul Samuelson, probably, so the whole time, writing on the blackboard, the Arnold equation model. It's very weird. It's a form of Manichaeism, if you want to put it this way. It's really this dualism. The ultimate meaning of the picture is clarified by the following page of the cover. The picture represents life in Africa in the 60s. It portrays the uncanny ability of the African to derive joy from traditional cultural activities and master the modern techniques directly needed in the solution of the problem of development in Africa. It reveals the secret of effective African nationhood. There are 2 points here. First is that there is an implicit value judgment in the fact that traditional activities, or traditional knowledge, or whatever, can be used as a source of joy, but not anymore as a source of solution to practical, political, economic problems. And second, there's really the reliance on a technocratic expertise which provides the sense of oneness between the rural and the city African. However, if one looks back at the picture, I'm not so sure about it. The two guys are looking in completely different directions. There's no real exchange, there's no real interaction. They represent two different worlds which coexist in the same physical space.
But this was written by Gerardo Serra?
No. Gerardo Serra attended the conference in 1962, and I found that the brochure of the conference in his private papers. Now, last aspect is related to teaching. This is taken from an article which appeared in African Affairs in 1960 by J.D. Roche, an economist, an expert in manpower planning, interestingly enough, who had worked in Kenyan universities for many years. And he was describing his own experience as a teacher of economics to Africans in Africa. What does he say? He compares the teaching of economics to Africans to bush clearing, in the sense that the teaching of economics, the learning of economics on the African's part, implies a radical departure from the traditional values to which they are accustomed. And he explains in detail. While the English student quickly becomes accustomed to consider the purely economic aspect of a situation, while bearing in mind other ethical, political, social aspects, the African has difficulty in accepting the whole method. He finds it hard to embrace a discipline which does not carry an inbuilt system of natural moral law and social justice. So among other complaints of the fact that Africans had problem understanding quantifications, graphs, and math, there was a more radical problem of conceptualization of what is economic per se versus what is not. Or in this case, the distinction, which is basic in undergraduate education in economics, between positive and normative economics. So we've seen in less than 25 years, there's been a huge extension of the domain of application of economics to the task of state building. What was a descriptive science? What was the practice of a small group of people struggling in the Department of Agriculture to get accurate information about cocoa became an important part of the ideological propaganda machinery in the one-party state. I'm not so sure about this, but I strongly suspect that what made it possible was realizing the epistemic nature of economics compared to other science, and its flexibility. I'll let us still to define better this concept, in the sense that historically it's been proved to be capable of providing policymakers with universal analytical templates, think the case of national income accounts, which allowed at the same time to fit in bits of local information collected on the ground and make it travel elsewhere, and at the same time support broad political visions. Thank you.
Sure, there are going to be some comments.
Thank you. Cameron Weber, New School for Social Research and State University of New York. Kwame Nkrumah, he wrote a book, Africa Must Unite, right? Africa Must Unite.
Yeah, 1963.
Yeah. So the African continent was divided up artificially into these nation states by the Europeans.
Yeah.
So, and like Thorstein Veblen said, the only thing the best thing, what the nation state does best is war. So I was wondering, did Kwame Nkrumah argue for the dissolution of the nation state when he argued for the unification of Africa? So the question is, did Nkrumah want the nation state to wither away?
Well, there's some debate about that. First of all, some historians think that he didn't even write Africa Must Unite, although it's his most famous work. So according to some, he didn't have the competence to write such a nice book. Anyway, it's very strange, because Nkrumah always supported the idea that nationalism, socialism, and Pan-Africanism were sides of a three-dimensional, four-dimensional coin, in a way. So he didn't want to abolish completely the boundaries of the nation state, but rather he was thinking a bit more about a federal system, like United States of Africa or something like that. What he didn't really say is that he would have loved to have been the leader of this whole coalition, and he was dreaming of a continental planning body, so a continental development planning, and this kind of majestic enterprise which probably would have failed to materialize. He was really dreaming of quick reallocation of resources from Ethiopia to Ghana to Eritrea according to specific policy objectives. It was a dream, in a way.
Because that kind of gets to can communism and socialism occur in one country?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Hi, David out of the University of Amsterdam. I asked earlier for the clarification questions. At one point you went really fast there, and you said that they were working on an alternative integration theory. Could you elaborate one more time why there was the idea that there was a need for an alternative integration theory?
Sure.
And then I've got another question with regard to your more general conclusion. You said that it's interesting to look at how we moved from economics as being descriptive to becoming ideological. And your step is that you said, well, that happened through general templates that travel very well. I was wondering whether you could also give me an example of that, or something that you found in your research that really functioned as this traveling template. So clarification questions.
Yeah. Well, they were working on a new market integration theory. They would have liked to work on a market integration theory. The research team on the economics of African unity lasted only a few years. Then when the coup d'etat took place, Reginald H. Green flew to Tanzania to become the advisor of another socialist and Pan-Africanist leader, that was Julius Nyerere. But beside that, I told you, and beside that book, which that is not really a great contribution to economics, honestly. I find it kind of naive. It's very interesting to read, but there's not really much to it. This was the kind of methodological program they were dreaming of, but it's not really well explained. I don't know if they've been discussing these points at the seminars at the University of Ghana in the 60s, because this is the only unpublished paper which survived pretty much, besides a few others on national income accounting. But it's clear that they really thought that market integration theory, the way it was taught and practiced in Europe and the States, was a bourgeois science, which really was bearing the mark of the place in which it originated. So of Weiner, of Pigou, and all these people. And that these people had nothing to say about the conditions of Africa. For example, because of the pretty much laissez-faire, from their point of view, orientation of the government. So, but the way they construct this new model is not really epistemically sound, I would say. It's a bit, but still, it was a visionary project in a way, which failed to materialize. I wish I could tell you more about that, because it's very interesting. But as I said, they were just thinking that the unification of the whole of Africa would have allowed the whole continent to be less dependent on new colonial patterns of trade. So there was really the post-dependency discourse. And with regard to the second question, a template which travels well, the national income accounts, for example. That's the best example, in a way. Because as you can see from the quote I told, these national income accounts were prepared in a few weeks. Sears and Ross didn't really make lots of field work and all that, but they still defended this sense of urgency. All of these numbers, probably, even if they're not made up, they are anyway very sketchy. And that is the case of most African countries. Still in the 60s, there's a very beautiful special issue of the Review of Income and Wealth, exclusively devoted to the discussion of the application of national income accounts to sub-Saharan Africa. in which they question its validity. But still, they're used because they work. And they work because, quote here Richard Stone, because they follow a standardized approach. It's not true in the real sense, just a convention which works to point out, highlight certain elements of the structure of inequality.
And what would be the ideological twist that comes with conventional accounting?
No. They are two kind of separated stories. In a way. It's more subtle, the interaction. It was interesting because this guy at some point designed political economy to become an ideological tool. They chose it to be that way.
Oh, I think this is an enormously rich project. I mean, I just don't know where to begin because of the role of the national income accounts in state planning and the sort of the dependence of economic analysis on national income accounts. But let me focus on something that I picked up. Maybe I just didn't hear right, but it sounds to me like the moving institution in your story was London School of Economics. Because I heard the name Lionel Robbins, Arnold Plant, there was a link between an explicit reference to LSE. I don't know whether Calder was at LSE when he was there. And so, but it's LSE. It's LSE is there in just the names you had up. And I was wondering whether, if this had taken off, if this had sort of not died in a coup and that sort of stuff, whether you might not have the sort of criticism of the LSE boys to match the criticism of the Chicago boys. Or maybe you did. Maybe in the petition you have a don't kill us because we're not them kind of thing. And so that for all of these institutional reforms, whether it's Chile or Ghana, there are economic advisors, but we lose touch with the ones that didn't work. Mm-hmm. And so that we remember the ones that worked in some sense, so that the neoliberalism, as it's called, has got real purchase in the modern world, whether some Pan-African stuff dropped out, so we back out and say, oh, the Chicago boys are important, but we don't simultaneously back out the LSE folks. The question is not very well formed because I know so little, and because why it's such a good idea that we have unfamiliar topics gathered today.
Right, okay. Well, the LSE was certainly one of the main centers of this making of colonial economics, but it wasn't the only one. For example, the schools of training for, the summer schools of training for colonial statisticians were usually held in Cambridge. And there was the Oxford Institute of Economics and Statistics, and the figure in Oxford of Herbert Frankel, South African economist who was the first white South African, obviously at the time, who was the first to work on development-related issue. The LSE came to prominence in the 40s when it was chosen as the institutional location of the Colonial Economic Advisory Council, of the Colonial Economic Research Committee, which took its place after 2 years, and more broadly of the Colonial Social Science Council, in which there was all this rich interaction among economists, sociologists, anthropologists, which the colonial funds were allocated to different disciplines to conduct primary research in sub-Saharan Africa. The LSE boys, well, there were some experts, some technocrats in the Ghanaian government that had received their training at the LSE, but interestingly enough, most of them survived the coup d'etat, the government statistician, for example, and some of them were the same ones being accused of not being socialist enough. For example, Mensah, this Ghanaian economist who went to study at the LSE and drafted the 7-year development plan, was under accusation by everyone because you're not socialist enough. This development plan is not socialist enough. Rewrite it. It became very, very, very stressful. And well, I mean, Ghana is well known for a tale of economic advisors whose advice did not work. William Arthur Lewis left in huge disappointment after a couple of years, and after that he wrote Politics in West Africa, which is the confession of his disappointment, because Nkrumah didn't really want to listen to him. Lewis was advocating for a balanced growth strategy, and Nkrumah just wanted massive industrialization immediately, so he left. That this year, we introduced these national income accounts, published a beautiful paper in the Journal of Political Economy in 1962 called Why Visiting Economists Failed, which is precisely a very bitter reflection on the role of this visiting economist who's a foreign traveler. He goes to a place, he tries to impose his own ideas, lots of time they don't listen to him, they put him in a 5-star hotels where he can't understand what's going on, he can't really face reality. And the third case is the one of Nicholas Calder, who apparently in some autobiographical remarks he wrote was very much impressed with Kwame Nkrumah. Then he realized that there was lots of corruption going on and all that. And he didn't stay there longer either. Just Nkrumah said, listen, I need lots of money to promote industrialization. And Calder said, well, forced savings. As simple as that. And of course, farmers and all that. The imposition of forced savings on farmers in the times of goods shortage and all that drove everyone crazy. People started rioting. So the whole thing was dropped. But Calder already flew away like a long time ago. It was somewhere else.
Okay, so first just a kind of frivolous comment. Your picture at the end there of the two people, the one playing the drums, and it actually reminded me of my copy of Feynman's lecture on physics from the 1960s, where you got Richard Feynman playing the bongos, and then before he gets into all the equations. But actually, on this issue of anthropology and what the discipline should be, I didn't get much of a sense of the sort of economic social structure. Were there tribal organizations and tribal things that would, and this issue of how that would have affected the success of the collectivization efforts. I didn't get a sense of how that worked, but I mean, insofar as a lot of that is going on, and Nkrumah is dealing with these tribal things, that would have a big impact on the nature of things and the appropriateness of things. So I was wondering about that aspect of things. And that would have a big impact simply on this issue of collecting statistics. I just got one other thing. On terms of, you mentioned one white South African. Actually, one important figure in certain British economic history, national income statistics from South Africa, is Charles Feinstein, who came from South Africa, but he was a major figure, I think, in and I don't know if, and I certainly think his South African identity had some influence on how he saw things. I think his career was mainly at Oxford, but I mean, there is this issue of people having an African perspective that would influence things. And I think the other thing going on at this time is the development of national income, through your time period. I mean, Kuznets is developing this, and Kuznets has this writing on the ethical implications of how you set up these things, and he's well aware of this issue. And I was going to mention, there's your LSE alumnus Adam Tooze, who wrote this. His book on statistics of the
German state.
German state. There's this whole issue going on in European countries of how you collect information, implication. It's not just Africa that's dealing with this. This is an evolving thing.
Okay, right. Well, I hadn't thought about Feynman, where the two sides come to coexist, the scientist and the percussion player. That's a very good point. About anthropology. Well, it really wasn't a tribal society, but in a way, ethnic divisions were fairly strong. We were talking about a country which is fairly small, but in which over 6 different languages are spoken. And the issue of collectivization is very interesting in an African context, because African socialism, when it comes to this, can be divided into two branches. One, which is the one of Nkrumah's, which thought that collectivization, socialism imposed a radical departure from tradition. So it's not a tribalism, because it always takes place within a monetized economy, right? Unlike the pre-colonial past. Other leaders of Africa, other socialist countries, and the best example probably should be Leopold Senghor of Senegal. He argued the opposite, that Africans were the real socialists precisely because they've always believed in a collectivized way, and that colonialism diverted Africans from socialism, that they invented socialism before Marx, in a way. So it's very, very complicated. In terms of power, like of implementation of policy, Nkrumah really opposed the traditional authority, the chiefs, which were kind of the heads of small administrative units in charge for tribunals and land tenure and all that. He made this very dramatic statement. He said, the chiefs will run away and leave their sandals behind. And that made, because in Ghana, chief is dethroned after the take off his sandals against his will. So it was a very powerful statement. And well, I mean, in a way, he had a real project of national building in the sense that ethnic politics in this period wasn't really nation state. He succeeded at least in that. While the chiefs who had been cooperating with the British administration for a long time had always been very successful in the Legislative Assembly, the Parliament, in lobbying specific interests about specific areas of the country, the Ashanti of different provinces. Yeah, so that's, I don't know if that answers your question.
I wanted to follow up both of these remarks in an exploratory way. And the thrust of my remark would be, rather than a history of Ghana, you tell us the history of development economics as a discipline. And in a sense, when David talks about the London School of Economics, I am a graduate around the late 60s. And that's the heyday of the man whom you have not mentioned is Lord Bauer. And Basil Yemi and Harold Eady, and then on the left side you have Titmus, and you have all of this. So LSC becomes a very big center. And these are Gerard then goes to the World Bank and writes this volume on pioneers in development. And you are very conscious of the fact that Arthur Lewis is one of us, and so on, you see. And so this is the history of development economics. And who are the theorists? Well, it is South Africa. Theoretical welfare economics by Graf. Feinstein is there. And then what are they contributing to economic theory? Well, they are full-time practitioners of growth economics. And they are full-time practitioners of labor economics. And so in a sense it extends. You get the same sort of, if you like, this subservience to reunification to national income accounts. You get in India, you get in Pakistan, you get in the East African colonies and so on. So in a sense, I'm saying you are being too modest in limiting yourself to Ghana. And then I want to now exaggerate a little bit more and say this is not only the story of development economics, it's the story of economic theory as a tool of ideology.
That's flattering in a way.
And so this may be exuberance of a certain kind, but I refer you to Arjen Rubinstein. So what does he say? Economic theory is more useful for us to understand economists than to understand an economy. And this is in published sources. I mean, here's the president of the Econometric Society. I mean, it's not some crank writing in monthly review. And so this is a fascinating story, and it's fascinating universalistic reach.
Right, okay. Well, the issue of development economics is another part of the thesis. I won't deal with this issue here. But the most striking thing about the first generation of development economists, I think that Richmond would be the topic of the next talk, got it right. We said that the first generation of development economists, leaving aside those who also worked on growth, like the real theories of the economics of development, were trying to come up with a new research program. So Richmond put it this way. Now I'll explain in a second this. Okay, Gershon produced this matrix. You've got kind of a methodology axis and a policy axis. On the methodology axis, it says the mono-economics claim, which assumes that there's one single body of economic theory which applies everywhere, in every time and place. And the pluri-economics claim means that different areas, based on different cultural, sociological, whatever, need to have different sets of economic theory. And then there's a policy variable, the state of market. So it says, both some Marxist thinkers and the neoclassicals really agree on the fact there's one body of theory and they just apply it to a different context. The extent to which oh sorry, I made a mistake, it was the opposite. The extent, that's terrible. The extent to which development economics was really a new thing was the fact that while not questioning, with the exception of Peter Bauer, he was a black sheep in the first generation of development economy, while not questioning the importance of the state, they were really struggling to find a new body of theory which would suit specific African conditions. That Lee Sears called it the limitations of the special case, that it's wrong to just transplant these ideas. But Peter Bauer is very different from a variety of reasons, not only for his policy implications, but I find him very, very, very interesting for his methodological approach. Among the first generation of development economists, was the one who was working more like an anthropologist. He's really one, he's been the one to praise African economic rationality because he had spent there a long time writing candidly in an ethnographic fashion. This, for example, was the argument of Lord Messiah, of Magnan Desai. He was not exactly, I don't know, a pro-market guy, but still he said that the most contribution of Bauer to development economics is precisely this idea of fieldwork. Because the lack of fieldwork, among other things, really legitimized a lot of wrong assumptions, or rather of lack of assumptions, of microeconomic foundations of development economics. As you can see, all these kind of cultural arguments which hide the fact that these people are rational. In economic history, the economic history of Africa, only in the 70s, it was 1973, it was established that Africans were rational. But before that, still in 1960, you had lots of articles proving the fact that Africans are not rational, that they don't respond to price incentives, and the same supply labor curve that was showed by Christopher a couple of days ago. You know, it was still used. Yeah, it was still used in debates on African economic policy to legitimize, especially in settler colonies, not in Ghana, but in South Africa and Zimbabwe and these places, to justify low wages for African workers and the reserve system, based on the fact that they behaved this way because they were not rational. The last article I found about this was in 1960. It's
But anyway, what Esther Duflo and Abhijit Banerjee are doing now is what Bauer always wanted them to do. They are doing field work under the guise of here.
Yeah, that makes lots of sense, I believe.
Well, there would be reservations about that field work that is being done now. But I have two questions. One was about the, put in a blunt way, before the economists came in, it was God or Satan, and it was by chance and windfall. Is it really different afterwards? When I see your picture, when I, you know, after the talk, of course I know nothing about Africa, so I wouldn't dare answer the question. I just want to raise it. The other thing is that this was a British colony, and was there any difference? Well, let's say that Africa was basically French or English, a little Italian, a little German, but doesn't count. Was there a little for black African? I'm not talking about the Arab part, but was there a real difference in the way it was organized with the local administration? For example, in the French case, you mentioned Léopold Sédar Senghor, and there was really an elite of black Africans who were raised in the French Republican schooling system. Some of them became representatives at the National Deputy Assembly, whereas now there are almost no black in the French Assembly. At the time there were blacks. One of them became, how you say it in English, chair of the House for the Senate House. He was the chair of the House. So, I mean, there was some kind of really indigenous, strong, schooled administration, which in many times permitted to have independence without that many trouble, without wars, black Africa, I mean. Was it the same with the Brits, or, and wouldn't that play a big role in the difference for later, after independence?
Sure, thank you very much. Right, about the first question, was it really different? The short answer is no. The slightly long answer is that it was different to some extent. For example, regarding the case of Ghana, in 1943, so pretty much when this memorandum was being written, they employed an economic advisor. They explicitly asked, an African member of the Legislative Assembly, explicitly asked for an economic advisor to be sent to Ghana and be in charge for lots of different things. Cocoa industries, cocoa marketing board, agricultural cooperatives, in theory should have been a very, very powerful element in the reshaping of the economies in this period. In fact, as far as I've been able to see, his main contribution was the creation of the statistical office, in a way. So there's this huge gap between the expectations, the ability to shape stuff, and this kind of political employment of data. Like, we can't intervene, we need to know more about this, we need to know more about that. So it didn't really make a difference, no. But certainly, if we want to look at the country as a whole, this kind of discourse helped increasing the development of the city and the countryside. Certainly this new creation of educated elite, which became, and this is the historical origins of what in development economics is called the urban bias, in a way. The fact that there's this differential in income between the city and the rural areas, the fact that the city consciously designs policies which exploit in a way the countryside in order to. These guys are very, very powerful argument to do that. And the main example would be the Cocoa Marketing Board. In theory, it was designed to protect the cocoa farmers from fluctuations in international prices. In fact, it became a means of taxing them. And in spite of all the talk of like, we'll break out with colonial institutions, in a way it's still there, in a renewed form, but it's never gone away. It's always been used, for example, to fund Soviet-style industrialization at the expense of cocoa farmers in the 60s. The second point was very, very different. There is a certain kind of similarity, of this, what I called before, the tension between international standards and indigenous knowledge. So they want these people to be indigenous, but they want them to be trained in their same way. So in the case of the British colony, it was the Gold Coast, it was the University of Ghana, the Richmond College. In the case of Senegal, it was the Tamil institution. What was different was the administrative structure. But this idea of educating them in a certain way, similarly as Europeans, in order to make them more efficient or better managing their own affairs, that's been a constant. I think pretty much every colonial empire in this period. Maybe not the Portuguese, maybe, but otherwise, pretty much, I would say that that was the case.
Just a quick follow-up on that last part. The reason I was wondering along your lines is you had that quote about the Africans not being good at math, and I was wondering, because there's more of a notion of the French sort of emphasizing more the abstract mathematics and so on. That's why I was wondering about his question as well on that. Whether you're suggesting you don't have a sense of that in the curriculum, sort of greater emphasis on mathematics in the French curriculum.
Well, to be honest, I don't go to this level of detail because it's very difficult to find this kind of information.
No, but that I can answer. For the maths, it was not so much the blacks, but the Arabs. And still now, with the new Arab revolution, I don't know. But at least when they had their dictators, every year there would be grants by the national governments of Tunisia, Morocco, Algeria, etc., to send the best ones of the country to France. And some of them are just tremendous mathematicians. So they come to France, they don't go to the university because in French the system is such that university is not the place to go but to special classes. They went to the special classes, they took the competitive exams with the French, and some of them are just really good. So that there is a tradition of getting the best of those youth from the Arab North African countries to train them, and they make part of the mathematicians at where I am, the National Center for Scientific Research. Yeah. There is a tradition there, still now.
One of the things we study in Vanity is the origin of the debate between anthropologists and economists. So in the terms of the debate is universalization. And so I wonder whether there's an echo of that, the debate you run into with what we study.
Well, I found that you were working on this yesterday when I started going through the book. But certainly it is a response in a way. So the economists did not always promote equalization, as you can see. And that has to do with the emergence of development economics in contrast with social anthropology. The strange continuity, the contested continuity between these two disciplines. I think there's something to do with that.
Thanks very much. This is good.